Welcome to the Journey Podcast, where we showcase some of the most inspiring stories from all around the world. And today I have the honor and privilege of interviewing one of the most dynamic people that I know, Dr. Saarah Nicolas, who is not only a trauma psychologist, but also a heart healer, a life guide, and so much more. She's a wonderful wife, a wonderful mom, and I know that you guys are going to get a lot of value from today's podcast episode. And also, we're here at the Tampa Counseling and Wellness Center, and she is actually the new owner of this phenomenal establishment here in the Tampa Bay area. So, Dr. Saarah, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Josh. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because we recently met at a mental health symposium, and immediately we just kind of hit it off in the sense of connecting and feeling very similar in a lot of ways. And we connected, in so many different angles. And we jumped on a call and got to know a little bit more about each other. And I was really excited to jump into today's episode because your story is just so expansive, and how you got into the world of psychology and your background, your family history, all of that good stuff. And if you can just give our audience a little bit about how you even got into this world, a little bit of your, kind of like your childhood leading into just you being a psychologist.
Sure. My life has definitely, in all intents and purposes, influenced the way I became a psychologist and the reason I became a trauma psychologist in particular. Abandonment is a big buzzword that we hear these days, and it can come in all shapes and forms. And for much of my life, I knew a lot of abandonment. I have never met my biological father. I grew up with my grandparents in Jamaica and immigrated here to live with my mom, who went to college here.
Wow.
And for many of those years, I grew up in a very beautiful, amazing space in Jamaica with my grandparents. But when you are in a space where there are other kids around, but your parents aren't around, you feel like you have to show up in a certain way in order to get love, right? Because you're not inherently there as the primary child. And so you shift and shape to feel safe and feel taken care of in those spaces. But when I moved to the United States, honestly, I experienced a lot of emotional abuse and mental abuse throughout my childhood. There were times and places where it got so toxic that I decided to leave my home, and I was just couch surfing. And that, for all intents and purposes, I was homeless at that point. And I didn't know at the time, but that part of my life would really shape the way I approach therapy with the clients that I have.
For sure.
I was almost dropping out of school, getting terrible grades at that time. You would never think that of as a PhD person, but I was, until one day I just realized no one is going to come and save me.
Of course.
I'm either going to disappear into becoming a statistic of, unfortunately, many of the people that I love and care about from my childhood became, or I'm going to try my hardest. So I walked into my counselor's office. I said, hey, I know that I've been massively ruining my academic career so far, but I'm actually really smart if you give me a chance. And he put me in a couple of AP classes, and I cut off most of the people that I knew at the time, not because I didn't love them, but I knew that if I continued to be with them, that I would end up in a space that would not be conducive to a happy and healthy life.
Of course.
At 16, I had to make that realization, and I drove that academic, once I got that shot, I took it and I drove it all the way up to a PhD. And but there was a lot of trauma and a lot of fear, to be honest with you, that drove my success. And a lot of having to or feeling like I wasn't able to take care of myself during that time, because the only thing that mattered was stability. And in my mind, my academics was my stability. And so that's where I was hyper focused for almost 10 years. And it wasn't until I went through graduate school, it wasn't until, which was a space that also broke down a lot of my identity in order to become what people consider a professional. I sacrificed a lot of who I was. I sacrificed a lot of my personality. I sacrificed a lot of the good parts of my childhood that made me who I am, to become what I thought would make me a stable person, would make me successful. And it wasn't even about success in the sense of people recognition. It was for stability, right? Just being able to live and feel like the rug wasn't going to get pulled out from under me at any given time. And so what I thought was going to make me a good professional at first was giving all of those things up. But actually, when I started to become a professional in some of the spaces that I worked in, for instance, I worked at the VA, and I went in there as my like perfect buttoned up self, with none of the personality that I had before. And those veterans, they could see.
Who the hell is this? Like,
they could
this
see,
kid,
yeah,
coming.
but they could see the BS written all over
Absolutely.
me, right? I was
Absolutely.
smiling, I was kind, I was nice, I was polite, I was very educated in a lot of evidence-based practices, and they just chewed me apart. And they asked me, like, have you ever done drugs? Have you ever known trauma? Do you know anything?
And how do you know about grief and,
Exactly. And I did know about all of those things, but I was taught my entire career, you don't talk about those things. That's not what you present to people. You present them the facts, the evidence, the tools, but you don't show them that part of yourself. And that day I took a risk and I said, you know what? Because I was tired of it. I was like, I have had those experiences. And I shared in a way that I'd never shared as a professional before.
I love that.
And the tension broke in the room. And after that day, I decided, you know what? There's a lot of my childhood that contributes to who I am as a person. And it should contribute to who I am as a professional. And so from that day on, I decided, you know what? My past is a part of who I am, and it's going to be a part of what helps me connect with people. And so as a psychologist now, my past, the trauma I experienced, it helps me empathize with people. It helps me connect to people. And it helps me to, honestly, I believe my superpower is being as non-judgmental as humanly possible.
For sure.
Because once you've gone through some of the things that I've gone through, you don't feel like you can judge other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that's what kind of sets me apart and like has helped me become the psychologist that I am today.
That's amazing. And as you explain your story, I think about a lot of what I resonated with when you first told me some of these aspects of your life. And like, for example, not having my father, I oftentimes share that I never had a meal with my biological father. I never heard him verbally say happy birthday.
Right.
And, I can probably count with my fingers the amount of days that I had the opportunity of spending with him. And that obviously women, of course, but men, it does damage in a major way. And for anyone, men, women, and I connected at that level. But also, I love your competitive nature. And I remember you told me this story of you were in the classroom and the teacher or the professor kind of came up to everyone and said, 99%, and I'm paraphrasing here, 99% of you are not going to make it through this program. And the first thing that came to your mind was like, man, that sucks for all of you guys. I had told someone about it. We were just dying laughing because that's that competitive drive.
For sure.
And one of the things that I oftentimes talk about is how a lot of that competitive drive does come from trauma. It does come from those feelings of not feeling like you're enough, or the abandonment that you may have gone through. And you always feel as if you have something to prove.
100%.
And that was another way that I connected, just that competitive nature. And I do feel like there's a little bit of that in you that's directly rooted to your past, of course.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you were in Jamaica and you were like the light-skinned kid, right? And your story is very similar to Bob Marley. Are you familiar with how his dad kind of abandoned him as a child? Have you ever heard the story?
I haven't heard that part of the story.
So Bob's mom, Bob Marley is like half black, half white,
Mm-hmm.
and his mom's super dark. His dad was just this white. They called him the captain,
Mm-hmm.
and just completely abandoned him throughout his life. But he never really fit in being the light skinned kid in Jamaica,
Okay.
right? And but the thing about it is, he kind of channeled a lot of that trauma in a sense. And I'm curious, what was that like for you in Jamaica, right? Like, did you stick out like a sore thumb, and was that awkward, kind of finding your own place in
Mm-hmm.
a world that did not necessarily look like you?
Honestly, interestingly, part of my family is the Marley family.
Mm,
So, like my sisters, they all have the last name Marley. My brother,
wow.
um, and we're all light skinned. I
Mm,
grew up because I actually grew up in a pretty affluent part of Jamaica. And when you get into the different rungs of Jamaican society, once you get into the wider spaces
yeah.
of Jamaican
Hmm.
society, there's a lot of mixture,
Got it.
right? There's
Got
a
it.
lot
Got
of
it.
mixture. And so in Jamaican society, we deal with race and class a little bit differently
Mm,
than in the States, where there's a lot more mixing, and there because we have so many people of power who are
hmm.
black.
Yeah.
Um, there's there's an understanding that like if you're white in Jamaica, you probably got some affluence just because
Hmm.
that still is there from
For
the
sure.
days like
Yep.
colonization, but there's less treat like ill treatment
Absolutely.
based on
Yeah.
color. It honestly actually wasn't until I came to the United States that I really understood that I was a biracial
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
When I came here and people would ask me, "Are you what are you?
Yep.
Are you black? Are you white?
Same here.
What's going
Yeah.
on here?"
Hmm.
Being called all types of weird different names.
Yep.
I had a very thick accent at the time. I honestly started hanging out with Puerto Ricans because
Yeah.
I
You
was like,
gotta.
I think I look like the Puerto Ricans the most. So I
For
started
sure.
hanging
For
out with Puerto
sure.
Ricans, but I didn't have to start figuring out the race game
Hmm.
until I came to the States, to be quite honest. But I also came here when I was 10 years old. And so those things didn't matter as much in
Mm.
Jamaica. But when I came here, it was very stark.
Yeah. For
They were
sure.
like, pick a side.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like just race dynamics and how it is very different depending on where you are. I had my wife's aunt I was recently talking to. She's from the Bahamas,
Hmm.
and she mentioned when she came to the U.S., they referred to her as black. But in the
Hmm.
Bahamas, she like she said she never realized she was like black.
Black.
Never
Yeah.
identified as a black person.
Yeah.
She was Bahamian.
Right.
And that's just what it was,
Yeah.
And then she comes here and it's like, okay, like this is what you are.
Hmm.
And in her mind, it's just like, what the hell? Like she didn't even realize that
It's a
that was the
really
thing.
interesting dynamic, and it just screams the arbitrariness with which race is bent on. Because yeah, in Jamaica I would be probably more considered a white person,
Hmm.
but in America I'm more considered a black person.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And same, like I lived in the Bahamas for a decade,
Hmm.
and I definitely understand like the dynamics in terms of the different treatment you get. Like for example, my wife is much darker than I am, and she walked into a bank and she asked for these sleeves for the coins. You know how they
Hmm.
have the
Yeah, I
coin
remember those.
sleeves?
Yeah.
And they were like just super stingy with the amount that they gave her.
Hmm.
And I walked in and asked, and they're like loading it up,
Wow.
right? Because in Bahamian society, and they refer to like white Bahamians as Kunky Joes.
Okay.
And they don't realize I'm not from the Bahamas, but I look like a typical Kunky Joe.
Uh huh.
And the treatment is just unfortunately very different.
Hmm.
And you come to the Bahamas though, I mean, you come to the US and it's like, no one gives a damn,
Right.
it's a different world, but like you said, it's also that you choose sides.
Yeah.
Like where are you this, are you that, right?
Hmm.
And it's interesting because I have my three boys, and I'm curious as a mom,
Hmm.
like how are you going about just even teaching race to your kid? Because I have my three boys, and it's I obviously know that race is going to be a big part of their life, but we kind of don't want to push just any specific mental frames around
Yeah.
race on them,
Mm-hmm.
and just have them find their way. Because I feel like for kids, sometimes you can push that on them, and then they spend the rest of their lives wanting to feel like they fit in, or wanting to
Right.
feel like they're enough, or
Right.
so I'm curious
Or
as
start
to
living their life by those archetypes that you've
exactly.
influenced on them in the beginning.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I know your child obviously is 1 years old, but have you and your husband spoken about like just even race as it pertains to your kid, and just
Mm-hmm.
your child growing up in this world?
Oh, definitely. And because there's so many dynamics for a young black boy. My husband is Haitian and he's darker than me, and so our son is kind of in the middle. And when I was growing up, because I grew up in a place where race really wasn't as much a factor, my mom didn't really teach me about race in that way. And so I had to learn a lot of hard lessons when I came here
Mm-hmm.
about racism off the cuff. And so I do wish that I had a little bit more of an education around those things. And my husband came from a family that he got a lot of education about those things before navigating the world. And so part of it, I think, as a father, it's important for him. He's a black man living in this world, and so I think a lot of it he feels very important. He feels like it's very important for him to guide his son
Mm-hmm.
in navigating that world because it's his lived experience, and so I won't defer everything, but I defer a lot to him because his lived experience has shaped his worldview, and I think it's very important for him to instill that in his son. I can't speak for him, but I believe that that's a part of his experience. For me, I believe that at least teaching the way the world works.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I want to necessarily teach my son who he needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
I want him to be able to figure that out for himself and understand that he's not a monolith, that there's many things. Fortunately, he comes from a family with very interesting dynamic people, and so I think that will be inherent for him. But I do want him to understand the world, the way the world works, because
Sure.
the likelihood that he will be one of the only black children in a lot of white spaces, that is probably a big likelihood for him. And
Yeah.
so I want him to understand dynamics that are at play in our country, because it could and can and will influence him at some point in
For
his life.
sure.
At the end of the day, it's going to be up to him to decide how he moves and navigates through the world. I think the best thing that I could do for him is give him the confidence and help him to feel secure and loved within his family space. Because when you feel secure and loved by your family, the world is always going to be harsh, but it's a little less harsh,
Mm-hmm.
because it gives you the confidence to move through the world and the permission to be your authentic
For
self.
sure.
If you know at the end of the day there is somebody, the
Mm-hmm.
person that loves you, the person that matters the most, loves you the most.
Absolutely.
And so it gives you some of that confidence to go out into the world and navigate it the way you need to.
Yeah, most definitely. I think for my three boys, it's also important for me to raise three boys that are not feeling like victims,
Right.
right? Or
Hmm.
that they're just less than
Hmm.
because they're black, right?
Right.
And that's a big part. I actually find myself embracing more of like my African heritage and just my ancestry. I did a whole ancestry. Have you ever
Yes.
done
No, oh my
the
gosh, that thing would blow up.
yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because about 30% of my bloodline is just strictly from all throughout Africa, scattered
Nice.
all across the Ivory Coast. And I find myself, I recently just took my kids to Cape Town, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And
Yes.
it is important for me to really just have them understand that there's also a lot of benefits to just
Hmm.
being a black person.
Hmm.
There's a lot of opportunity as
Hmm.
well, and you don't have to feel as if you're behind, or you're not going to be accepted, or you're not going to be welcomed into these. Even if that is the case for a lot of people, I just don't want them going into the world feeling as if this is going to be a block, that
Hmm.
they have to encounter, or
Yeah.
having the limiting beliefs
Yeah.
that hold them back, right?
Yeah. I completely agree with that. Um, I think there's a lot of magic in Black culture,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I want my son to know that magic within himself.
Absolutely.
The rhythm, the connection, the
Mhm.
authenticity,
The
of
depth.
the depth
Mhm.
of our people are it runs very deep, and he's a part of that culture. And I think it's what's going to make him such an amazing, beautiful person. And so that's something that I'm going to instill with him more than anything else. I think the thing that I want him to be able to discern is there's the reality of who you are, and then there is how other people will perceive you.
Of course.
And you need to be able to know the difference so that you can have the confidence, but move through the world in a way where you're not just kind of like open to like shots,
Definitely.
whenever they come up, both metaphorically and realistically.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, I know that you've worked with a lot of veterans over the years, and I'm curious as to what has that journey been like for you? I know you're very passionate about just working specifically with veterans, and even here at this establishment, you guys have a lot of veterans that come. What has that been like in terms of just working with them, and if there was any piece of advice that you would give for people who may have served, let's just say in Afghanistan or Iraq or any of these places, what would that advice be?
Sure. Well, it starts with my dad, my stepdad. He's a veteran, and he was in the Air Force for a while, and he suffered through certain things that ended up where he struggled with some mental health stuff. And he's struggled, and I've watched my dad suffer silently for almost his entire life with those things. And honestly, in addition to some of the other things that I experienced in my childhood, watching my dad suffer in silence was one of the main things that kind of influenced me to go into psychology. I remember even when I was in high school, I would do IQ tests on him and things like that, because the world of psychology was always like so fascinating to me, and I wanted to like know how he thought and what he felt, because he was the person that held our family together, but I could see very apparently that he was suffering, and our family struggled because he was struggling.
Yeah.
And because he's the man, he's the leader of our
Of course.
family. And so when I went into psychology, the VA felt like a very natural choice for me because
That's
of
amazing.
the space that I grew up in. And like I said before, I owe a lot of who I am as a psychologist now to veterans, because they've gone through hell and back, whether they went to war or not. Many of those people, whether it's before they were in the military, were in the military, they have had really intense lives. And so their BS meter is super strong and has helped me to become a more authentic person. And so in addition to being a trauma psychologist, I was a sexual trauma psychologist for a long time, and just listening to the stories of the hurt and the pain that people have experienced, that has shaped me as well. Because I have always felt that it is the greatest honor and privilege to take someone who has struggled through so much and give them hope and new perspective.
For sure.
It is one of the most magical things in the entire world, Josh, to have someone sit down in your office, not know who the hell you are, not trust you, open up, tell you the deepest depths of their soul.
Absolutely.
And you go through this dance together, and at the other end, they are an entirely new person.
Yeah.
They see the world in a different way. They see themselves in a different way. They can leave their homes again. They can date again. They can love their children in a different way. And it's almost like every veteran I've ever healed, it's like healing a part of me. And it's like healing a part of my family.
Yeah.
And so I owe a lot of who I became as a psychologist to veterans.
That's amazing.
I moved into corporate America after that, and I trained therapists for a long time. That's what I did in corporate America. And I love training therapists because, again, I was on a mission at that point. After I'd left the VA. I was like, every therapist that comes into my path, I'm going to teach them to be authentic. I'm going to decolonize everybody. I'm going to debunk all of these ideas of who you have to be. And it worked out well, right? It worked out well. I gained a lot of success in helping therapists model authenticity to them so that they could do it with their clients. And I gained a lot of passion there. And I owe that to veterans. Yeah. And so now that I'm in a space where I'm helping them again, it almost feels like I'm home. Every veteran I speak to, I do consultation calls. We do service-connected disability for veterans who we do mental health evaluations. And before they do the evaluation, I call them to see if they're just eligible.
For sure.
And having those calls again makes me feel like I'm back in that magical space where I'm taking someone from point A to point B, even if it's in a 20-minute consultation.
Mm-hmm.
I've had veterans open up about their traumas for the first time on those calls. I've had veterans who have had back pain their entire lives and don't even understand that that's why they're yelling at their wife every night.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they can't talk to their children. That's why they're not leaving the house. They don't understand how much their mental health is being impacted by their pain.
For sure.
And I get to be the person that helps them understand that so that they can get service connection and therapy and treatment and healing. And for me, as a psychologist, there's no greater gift
Absolutely.
than to be able to help people in that way.
Absolutely. It's interesting because we just wrapped up Men's Mental Health Month last month, and I've become a lot more passionate about just the topic of men's mental health specifically, because just navigating through fatherhood and navigating through, just like you said, being the head of your household, and the pressure and the stress, and especially if you're like an entrepreneur and already navigating through the stress of business and the cycles of business. And I found myself going through moments where, you get the anxiety, you get the fear. Oftentimes I refer to it as the boogeyman that kind of pops up in random moments of your life, and you think you got your shit all together, and here you are, like, I went on this whole healing journey. I did all the plant medicine ceremonies and just all kinds of modalities, hypnotherapy, all kinds of stuff, personal development over the years. And just when I thought I had all of my shit together, I'm here coaching people, and then bam, you encounter the boogeyman, and he just comes out of nowhere and scares the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And for me as a man, I know it hit me when, going through business challenges and providing for my family and the uncertainties that come with being an entrepreneur. And it just sent me into a hell, that I never would have thought I would have encountered. And there's still something transformative about the dark seasons.
Yep.
And I'm curious as to what do you feel in terms of, like, especially men's mental health. What are some of the modalities or tools that you feel have been the most effective? And like, I'll give an example. I do a lot of reframing with clients. So if they went through something very traumatic, like yourself, and I'll have them go over, okay, if you had the opportunity to take it back and not have gone through it, not have gone through that dark season, would you take it back? 99% of the time, they wouldn't take it back. They would have still gone through the process because, number one, there's more depth, there's more substance, there's more resilience, there's more wisdom. They're more valuable in the marketplace, just like you are.
Yeah.
You're far more valuable because of the germination process that happens in the dark.
Right.
And what you've gone through. Your traumas have been some of your greatest gifts. And I'm curious as to, outside of reframing, of course, what have been some of the tools or the go-to strategies to really help those veterans heal?
For folks who are really big, high achieving people who really want to make their mark in this world, and particularly for people who their traumas are driving them, they don't realize sometimes that they are struggling just in like nicer clothes, right? When they become successful. And the success, because the success, whether it's a uniform, a military uniform, or it's a suit and tie, or whatever version of that is for you, that uniform becomes the new armor, right? That becomes the new identity that says, like, I get to be stable, I get to be respected, I get to matter because I'm wearing this uniform now.
It's like a shell.
It's like a shell. And so and once that you have that outer shell, you're like, okay, I'm good now, right? I've got the armor. I should be good now. I can kind of just like move with ease. And so when those dark times hit, you're like, I worked super hard to build this armor, and it's not working the way I intended it to work. And that becomes a big turning point for people where they can recognize I can have the stability, but it's not going to be what makes me whole, right? You don't have, it's not an either or. You can have a both and. And so I found that the things that help the most is helping people understand like who they are when they're naked, metaphorically speaking, right? I've realized, particularly for things like depression, for women, it's when they're giving too much of themselves.
Yeah.
That's when women become depressed. For men, it's when they are lonely. They become lonely because they kind of shell themselves off.
Yeah.
Because they put on that identity and they become a provider, they become the husband, but they don't have connection.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And so a big thing for me is helping men feel connected to other men, to their wives, to their families, yes, of course, but being connected to other men is a really important part of healing for men, in my personal opinion.
Very true.
Right? To normalize the pain that men go through, because men are taught in our society, in many societies, to suffer in silence.
Yeah, for sure.
And women, we have a gift. We get to connect with each other. We're chatting on the phone, talking for hours.
Yeah.
Men have not been given that gift in our society. And so part of it is helping men find their village.
Of course. Of course.
And I've found that there's so much that I can do with someone one-on-one in a room, but there's a different kind of magic that happens when men find their village and they're able to connect with each other and normalize the pain that they're going through.
Yeah.
And they have to be able to break down that barrier in order to normalize each other's pain. So that they can work through things together as a unit.
Most definitely. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because in this season, one of the things that I've been doing, I go to a men's business leaders meeting with my church. So they have all the business leaders within the church community who kind of come together, and it's a safe space for men to come and also express like their wins and wars for the week. And they'll go over some of the wins in business or just family life, things like that, but also the wars that they're navigating through. And at the end, they'll have all of these brothers kind of come together and pray each other out of the meeting. And it has been very therapeutic in a sense, because like you said, most men aren't necessarily expressive with their emotions. They don't really, you don't really talk about these things, right? And that's been super helpful. And I think another thing for me has been not masking the pain with drinking, smoking, pornography, things like that, and just allowing myself to feel the emotion and let it just wash through me. And that has been super helpful during this season specifically, because as you know, those emotions, if you bottle them up inside, they manifest themselves into diseases and ailments and all of these different
anger, all types of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And what would you recommend for a woman who, let's just say she has a man who's going through just a lot of mental health issues? And what do you recommend for the woman to do just to kind of best support him in that season of his life?
It's hard. Sometimes it's hardest to take advice and care from your spouse.
Of course.
I would say allowing a man to have an outlet of some sort. I think men need an outlet. I think that's really good. I would say encourage therapy if they're open. I think every man needs a space where they can be soft, even if they don't feel comfortable doing it at home initially. They need a space where they can be soft. They need a space where they can metabolize that energy, right? Where they can metabolize that anger and that pain and work through it and get the tools to be safe and heal. It's one of the biggest things in our society, and honestly, one of my greatest missions is to help men get therapy.
For sure.
Because men, I mean, in every family, everyone is an influence, but men hold a very strong and important role in families.
Absolutely.
And when one person in the family is in pain, the entire family experiences pain.
Yeah.
And so I might even frame it as a duty and a mission for a man to heal that part of himself.
Absolutely.
Right? To seek therapy, to heal himself, to seek his outlets, to seek other men who he can open up to, other people that he can open up to, so that he can be the person that he wants to be for his family.
For sure, for sure. I love that. And one of the things that comes to mind is you oftentimes hear that the men are the head of the household. And one of the best like metaphors is if the head is sick, the entire body will eventually be sick. And they say, you know, the if the man is the head, the woman is sort of like the neck to help give that guy support, you know, and direction in a sense. But if the head isn't doing well, the entire body will eventually get sick. And I think that that's essentially what happens in the family dynamic.
Yeah, and in relationships in general, right? When like parents to like in a unison, couples in a unison, like they dictate how a family, like how what a family ends up being.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
if that's not working well, none of the family works well, right? And because women are taught in society to kind of mold and shape, we tend to be a little bit more malleable to like changing what the dynamics of the relationship looks like. A man really is tends to decide what that is because the woman tends to be a little bit more malleable.
Yeah. For sure.
And of course that's a mass generalization. But I would in my personal opinion, I think it's equal for women to seek that therapy and for men to seek that therapy. But because women have so many more outlets,
Of
we give
course.
each other therapy all the time, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so for men, it's like they need that in some way, shape, or form. Society hasn't automatically given them that. And so they need that in a way so that they can have a healthy relationship with their partner and they can be a good leader for their families.
Yeah, most definitely. It's interesting because and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in our society, really a man's value is predicated on his ability to provide. That's where the value lies, unfortunately. And for let's just kind of give a scenario. A wealthy man will pick a partner and could care less about her accolades, could care less about her degrees or whatever she brings to the table or her ability to provide, and her beauty is enough. And I feel that in this society, it's really challenging because the bar is so high for a man to survive in this society and also be valued. Because for a man, it's like, okay, well, what's the cost of being a quote unquote high value man, right? A man that is not only confident but competent. I once heard a psychologist say that narcissism is confidence without the competence.
Right.
And I think about that, like a lot of women's frustration in today's society is that there aren't enough like really strong men. And it's because the bar is so high for men to even become like these high value men in a sense. And I hate to say high value because you know every man has value, but I'm really talking about a man who has the ability to provide and protect for a family and build a solid foundation. What do you feel is a necessity for the single mom who, let's just say she's raising a young boy, right? What do you feel is necessary for the development of that young boy to be able to blossom into his sacred masculinity and really be of value to the world?
Our world has shifted in a lot of really specific and important ways. We're not in a time anymore where, I mean, there are many amazing trade jobs, and I'm so grateful that more trade jobs are getting traction and people are going more
I
into
agree.
those.
Yeah.
But there was a time where you could make, you know, $30,000 a year, have a
Provide for a
house,
whole
provide
family.
for a whole family.
Yep.
And it was easier to be that provider person. And you're right, the bar has been raised for everyone,
Yeah.
right? And it keeps getting higher and higher and higher. Women, because we have moved through the world feeling like we have to kind of fight for a lot of our rights and our worth, there's now this trend where we've gone to college, become more educated, and so women are outpacing men in a lot of these things, which kind of contributes to a lot of that feeling that, oh my gosh, am I not going to be enough? And then we see in dating apps and things like that where like women tend to get a lot more recognition in dating
sure.
apps than men, and so there's a lot of things compiling, and it's natural and understandable why men would feel very intimidated by the world that they're coming into. I think this archetype where the man is the sole provider, we've moved away from that to a certain extent in society. Most women work at this point, and I think that any version of a family that someone wants to have can be made beautiful and successful in its own way. Whether you choose to have a stay-at-home person, whether you choose to have a dual working family, I think what can be missing for men at this point is that women, we've been pushed to do the man part, right?
For
The
sure.
traditional man
Yep.
part, but men have not been pushed to do the traditional woman part, which is find out what your emotional intelligence is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that the edge for men, that can be for men these days, is to actually become more emotionally intelligent, so that can help them become successful in their careers, but that can help them become successful in a home, no matter who's making more money
For sure.
in that home.
Yeah.
Because if you ask women what they want, it's not at this point in life, that when women have careers, it's not necessarily that they want a man that can just give them a bunch of money. They want someone who's going to love them, who's going to come home and be a whole human
Absolutely.
with them.
Yeah.
Right? Whether they're taking care of kids, whether they're the ones making more money. Right? Women don't need money from men as much as they used to.
Yeah.
They need a human.
Yeah.
They need somebody who's going to love them and take care of them and talk to them and reason with them and build a legacy with them, build the future with them, whether it's through his money, through her money, but they need somebody that's going to be emotionally stable, right? Because men have been pushed to be the providers, they have not been pushed to be emotionally stable. That's not something that their worth has ever been built on in the past.
For sure.
And so I feel like that's probably one of the biggest growth edges for men, is to become that emotional person, that emotionally stable person, right? Because emotionality looks different,
Absolutely.
And so for my son, I think for me, I want him to be, the most important thing for me is that he's a secure person. When my son runs off and then comes back to me, I'm like, yes, he's building a secure attachment, because building that secure attachment and being that steady rock. The thing I love about my husband the very most is that when I'm flailing all over the place, he's a rock. He's a steady human. And that, I think, is one of the things that can really give men the edge, whether they choose to be an actor, whether they choose to be a stay-at-home dad, whether they choose to be a CEO. In any of those spheres, women of this day and age, that's what they're looking for.
Space.
Right.
Absolutely. I love that. So, such really good advice.
Thanks.
And I'm curious, with you and motherhood and just being a woman and also a psychologist at the same time. I love just asking this specific question to psychologists or just even coaches who are in this space. What is it like for you when you have your emotional flare-ups? And like, are you like giving yourself therapy,
100%.
like coaching yourself out of it? Like, okay, let's go, Saarah. You already know, breathe, relax, right? Like maybe call another psychologist. What's that like for you? And I'm curious, how did you navigate through postpartum? Because I know for a lot of women, having a child, you kind of lose. Sometimes it may be your identity or your hormones change, right? You're physically not even the same person, right? Especially if you identified with just your beauty to the point where it's like, well, my body doesn't look the same. I don't feel like me. What was that like for you? Just kind of navigating through motherhood and just being a wife and also a psychologist simultaneously.
I feel like you just saw straight into my soul, Josh. I'm still battling those things today. Growing up in the space that I grew up with, I'm not ashamed to say that I've battled with depression. I've battled with thoughts of suicide and self-harm in my past, and those are things that I had to learn as a human to work through. And every once in a while, bouts of depression, bouts of sadness will pop up. In yoga, they call it a samskara. There's like a big patch that like just starts to get really painful right here for me, right? And in times of stress and in times of pain and in times where I feel the struggle of, being a business owner and a mother and a wife and all of the things, I would say that some of the tools that I've practiced over and over and over again, I go back to them whenever I have those feelings. Some of the ones I go to the most are I go on walks every single day.
Same.
To kind of do that bilateral stimulation, to get that some people do the tapping.
I do tapping, yeah.
But for me, my walks are are my religion to a certain extent, because they help me on my walks. I call my best friends, I call my mom. I
Absolutely.
get my village involved,
Same here.
right? So that they're hearing from me all the time. So even on my walk, even if I'm in a bad space, it's already natural that I'm going to call them and connect and process through whatever I'm going through. I tend these days to get more silent when I'm in those spaces, to really assess, like, what am I going through? What am I going through? I think one of the most important things for moms when they're going through postpartum, because it does change who you are, is to gain awareness of, like, the things you start telling yourself, because it's dark. It can
Yeah.
get really,
Oh,
really
yeah.
dark. And you can start convincing yourself. I divorced my husband 3 times a day,
Yeah.
right? When I first had my
For
when
sure.
I first had my kid, especially in the middle of the night. I think
My
I
wife
divorced
as
him like
well.
6
She went
times
through
in the
that.
middle of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
night,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And but you have to be mindful, like, what are the things I'm telling myself right now? Like, is this me, or is this what I'm going through? And speak kindly to yourself,
Yeah.
because there is an automatic tendency to be like, ugh, you look disgusting, or ugh, you like, why isn't this going the way it used to? Ugh, I don't do the things I used to. You have to be kind to yourself during
For
those
sure.
times.
That's so important.
And I think the fact that I am attempt to be, the first thought is mean, for sure, but you can't latch on to that thought.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing I teach in therapy, is that you can't latch on to the first thought. You can't just automatically believe that the first thought you had was true.
Of
You have
course.
to be like, is that helpful to me? Is that going
Yeah.
to help me evolve? And is that going to help me, like, lead a healthy
Of
life?
course.
What can I say to myself?
Absolutely.
And so the healing thoughts, right? The compassion, the love, even if it doesn't even have to be reframed. It can be like, oof, that was rough, girl. Like,
Yeah.
I love you. I love you. And just telling myself that I love myself
Yeah.
is enough, can be enough to, like, kind of switch my
Absolutely.
perspective for the day. And so
Absolutely.
those are my go-tos on a daily basis, is to
Yeah.
get some bilateral stimulation in, and to be kind to myself.
Same here. Same here. Yeah, it's interesting. And the thing about it is, these are like timeless things that have always worked and
Right.
always will. And so, like, no matter who you talk to in this field or in this space, you'll find a lot of overlap.
Agreed.
And yeah, and it's interesting. You spoke about just being aware of your thoughts, right? Metacognitive awareness, I believe, is what they refer to it
Yeah.
as. And and you also mentioned kindness. And I know I've gone through different phases where, even being this well-known coach, if you will, speaking on national television and podcasting and like all of this stuff, there's a high expectation, I guess. People think that, just because you're the psychologist or the coach, that you have all your shit together.
Right.
And I found myself during different moments where I get out of character, where I feel a little bit guilty or a little bit of shame around it. Like, man, this is, I shouldn't be acting this way. And you kind of beat up on yourself about it. And I've learned that you have to be kind to yourself, to that inner child that is fearful, and
Oh, yeah.
embracing that inner child that's just scared shitless,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Of everything, and feeling the guilt, feeling the shame. And so I'm so happy that you brought up just the kindness and compassion, because I find that also helps for me as well. Like, Josh, you need to be kinder to yourself. It's like, it's not that deep. You were not called to be perfect with your line of work.
And perfectionism is a big thing with folks who have experienced trauma, right? They believe that the perfectionism, they have to do it right in order for the success to happen, in order for the okayness to happen, and anything that veers off of that point. I even had that thought this morning. I walked out, my house is a wreck today, right now in this moment. And I was like, oh my gosh, why am I? And I love when my house is like clean and nice.
Same.
And when I walked out of the house, I was like, oh, I'm not doing enough, right? And then I had to think, like, you've had 100 things going on this week. It's okay for your house to look messy sometimes.
Of course.
And so it's having that second thought after it, because I want that perfection.
Yeah.
The trauma person in me wants that. The drive, the competitive person in me wants everything to be perfect all of the time. And that will never happen. And if you give yourself a dagger every time that doesn't happen, you end up depressed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a big thing for high achievers. That's a lot of reason why they do feel depressed, because no matter how good their life is going,
Mm-hmm.
if it bears off for, like, if they have a dirty dish, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, not enough. You're
Yeah.
not enough. Then that belief system, you're not enough, comes back,
Yeah.
right? And it's so familiar to you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so easy to go back to what's familiar.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
And so that depression, it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
kicks in.
absolutely. I'm curious to hear a little bit about your perspective on just marriage and what that journey has been like for you. I know for me, I always say that marriage for me has been top three most difficult things that I've had to navigate through. And there's a phrase in psychology that goes something along the lines of, if you don't heal from those who've cut you, you'll bleed on those who don't.
True.
And typically, the people who experience your shadow, your traumas, are the people who are closest to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you also hear things like, the idea of the twin flame, right?
Yeah.
And you get with someone who's there to, possibly eventually become a soulmate, possibly working
Mm-hmm.
together on the healing journey, or they're just there for a specific chapter to help you work on certain areas of your life that
Right.
you need to work on. But what has been your journey as it pertains to just marriage, and has it been smooth sailing with all? I mean, you kind of referenced that you wanted to get like divorced 3 times a day and during pregnancy and all that, and I know that was the case for my wife and I, and we
Mm-hmm.
still go through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say that all the personal development, and it just goes right out the window when it comes to marriage,
Oh.
because sometimes you just get triggered like nobody else can trigger you. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what that journey has been like.
Sure. I got married like older, right? 32, like around 32 is when I got married, and I went through graduate school single, and I was a serial monogamous before then. And so I didn't even know if I was ever going to get married, because I didn't I kept choosing partners that were like unstable. I kept choosing partners that were not right for me. I kept choosing people. I was like the classic woman who liked to fix people.
Yeah.
It's the psychologist in me, the
Mhm.
therapist in me. And I went through a period when I got here back to Florida from Mississippi, when I went to graduate school. And I said, I need to be dating more intentionally than I'm dating. I'm
Mm.
going back to therapy because clearly there's something wrong
Yeah,
here. And
for
and
sure.
folks would tell me, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, you're amazing, you're smart, you're beautiful, you're blah blah blah, all the things that people tell you.
Mhm.
And I said, no, something is wrong.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah,
is
yeah,
wrong,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I keep choosing the
I
wrong
got a few
person.
screws loose here.
Right, something's got to be wrong.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that it wasn't anything about me, but I had a bad picker. Like, my picker was off.
Mm.
Because I was picking my trauma. I was
Yeah.
picking my trauma over and over and over again. And so I went back to therapy, learned about boundaries. It's amazing how you can go through 10 years of school and never learn truly about boundaries until
For
you go to
sure.
therapy
Yep.
for
Very
yourself.
true.
I learned about having boundaries in the relationships and not kind of trauma bonding with someone immediately.
Mm.
And through that process, I became much more observant of like the types of men that I was dating. I slowed down the process hardcore. And when I met my husband, um, there were qualities in him that I had never seen in another person that I had ever been dating before. And I was able to see them because he had no interest in trauma bonding with me whatsoever.
Yeah.
And he was a kind, beautiful, generous human being. He's a very confident person. He had his facade up at first.
Yeah.
But I decided to marry my husband because he was probably one of the most emotionally stable people that I've ever met. I actually tell him how annoyed I am with him because he's way too emotionally stable for someone who's never
Yeah.
been to therapy. As our relationship progressed, part of the reason why I knew he was a good partner was because I never had to guess where our relationship was going. I think one of the hardest things for women, we can spend a lot of time going, well, maybe it's this, and hyper analyzing relationships. I believe that when someone is right for you and when someone's leading well in a relationship, you never have to question where you stand with that person and what that relationship where that relationship is
For
going.
sure.
And so we had a very intentional relationship moving into marriage. And he's Haitian, I'm Jamaican, so our cultures are similar to each other. And I had never dated someone in my culture before, honestly.
Yeah.
And it was really nice to be able to date someone who understood, had similar food to me, understood
Absolutely.
what kind of hair products I needed, things like that. My husband tends to be a very stoic human. I tend to be a very emotive human. And so I believe that we are kind of twin flames in that way.
Yeah.
And we challenge each other in those things. So one of the things that we talk about the most is what's the best way to move through the world? Is the best way to move through the world slightly more guarded? Is the best way to move through the world to like hyper connect with people? And I believe that it's a balance. And I believe that the biggest differences between us are what bring us to such a balance. I will say, for someone who has gone through a lot of relational trauma in their lives, this has been probably the most healing relationship that I've ever been in. And I definitely credit my husband to that. I don't think I've had a depressive episode since I've been in a relationship with my husband.
That's beautiful.
Outside of the postpartum stuff that we were experiencing, because when he met me and he knew all of me. And it's beautiful to be able to be your authentic self with someone and know that they keep choosing you over and over and over again.
Absolutely. I love that. For those who are looking for a partner, what would you say are essentially the red flags to look for? And like if you, let's just say you want to avoid like someone who's super toxic, right? Or someone who's a narcissist or just whatever, like what would you recommend if you had to kind of like let the entire audience know, hey, look out for this, look out for this, look out for this. And if they bring that to the table, just don't even entertain it.
This is something that I talk a lot about in therapy with people. So I love that you brought this up. One of the biggest things that I encourage folks to do when they're dating is have at least a 3-month rule. Don't fully get into that relationship for 3 months. We even had, when I worked in residential treatment, we had a similar thing. Anybody can be a good guy or a good girl for 3 months. Anybody can hide their big red flags for 3 months when they're putting out their best self to you. It's after that 3-month, 90-day period where you start to see a lot of the cracks.
That's good.
In the in what they're going through. And everybody's gonna have cracks.
Yeah.
They're supposed to have cracks. That's part of the human experience. All of us are just figuring out like what can I tolerate and what can I not tolerate.
Definitely.
Right? So for instance, with like narcissism, they can be a lot of love bombing in the beginning, and you're like, oh my God, this person's showering me with gifts, taking me everywhere, calling me beautiful. But you'll start to see the cracks after around 3 months. You'll start to see something, right? You'll start to see some of those. One of the biggest red flags for me is when you put up a boundary with someone and they're not willing to honor it. So, and that can look like some really small things in the beginning, because what will happen, particularly if you're attempting to, of course, avoid an abusive relationship, is that there will be small boundary crossings to test the waters to see what you're willing to deal with. And something that folks who have experienced a lot of trauma in their lives, they learn, I have to abandon myself in order to matter to other people. And people will test that, right? How much are you willing to abandon yourself in order to matter to me, in order to gain my love? And so they may
so good.
cancel a date at the last minute, right? Sometimes, of course, that happens, but like you'll see that consistently, or they will like ruin your night in a certain way. And it's the willingness to kind of just accept bad treatment, where they're like, oh, this person will start to accept more and more. And so like they'll kind of wear you down over time. Many times, or many people think, oh, like, how did you end up in that relationship? They don't realize that it's a slow burn, right? It's a slow grooming process for many people. I would say that someone who isn't very self-aware, right? They don't recognize their own flaws, or they're not willing to admit their own flaws. That's a big red flag, right? Because everyone is flawed. And in order to able to change and evolve in a relationship, marriages are meant to help us evolve to a certain extent. But you can't evolve if you're not self-aware,
Of course.
right? Awareness is the first step to change.
Yeah.
And so someone who is not very self-aware or kind of doesn't feel like they have any flaws, that can be I think that can be a big red flag as well.
Yeah. No, it's such great information. I'm curious. I want to go a little down the rabbit hole here, and I'll make sure Trey will keep us on track here because it can go like way down the rabbit hole. But I'm curious as to spirituality.
Okay.
I've wrestled with this for years, and I've traveled around the world and explored all different aspects of spirituality. One of the things that I've always been conflicted with, and I've spent a lot of time just in thought and also just kind of reflecting back on thousands of years ago, and there wasn't as much awareness around biochemistry. There wasn't awareness around trauma. There wasn't awareness around just science as much as it's prevalent today. And in spiritual communities, they'll refer to, let's just say, mental health as the devil, right? Or things like that. And I'm sure you probably have heard this. Or they'll say things like, you mentioned family, right? I've heard things like, well, the devil will come after your family, your health, and your wealth, right? I've heard things like that. And I've always done my best to kind of find a middle ground. Like perhaps there's truth to both perspectives, because for someone who, let's just say, is completely atheist or agnostic, they may not acknowledge that at all and take more of a science approach. And for me, I try to find the middle ground where perhaps what we refer to as, let's just say, trauma, 2,000 years ago, they referred to it as a demon, because it when you think about it, metaphorically speaking, like what it feels like when you're in those dark seasons and you're wrestling with these thoughts, it's almost like these archetypes sort of manifest themselves, and it could feel like the presence of like
a demonic
exactly
thing, right?
Like you're battling with your demons, as we oftentimes hear. So I'm curious for you, do you feel like these are biochemical things that and maybe like 2,000 years ago they weren't using these scientific terms, so they refer to it as a demon? Is it schizophrenia when they say that woman had a demon and they had to do an exorcism to release it? What's your perspective on that? I'm like super curious about this. I talk to a lot of people from different perspectives. You have Christian psychologists as well. You have psychologists that are completely, secular. And I always like try to find the middle spot. Is there a middle spot for you, or is it just like completely looking at it from a scientific lens?
I believe that we are this big. We're nothingness, right? We are so small in the grand scheme of the universe. And I think that for any one person to feel like they have the full answer is nonsense.
I agree.
I don't even know if it matters, to be honest with you. If it's, I think as humans, we really like to put things in boxes and label everything. Whether someone believes that it's a demon or whether or not someone believes that it is a chemical experience, the experience is still happening.
Yeah.
And we need, and we have to decide, are we going to do something about it or not? And so if you're coming from a scientific mindset, perhaps the intervention is medication. If you're coming from a spiritual mindset, perhaps the intervention is an exorcism. Whatever works. Sometimes the exorcism works, sometimes the medication works. Sometimes the medication doesn't work, sometimes the exorcism doesn't work, right? We have this evidence in the world of people living with schizophrenia in other spaces, and the culture just kind of takes care of people better, so it's not like impacting them as much, right? Mental health is very much an internal experience, but many times it's just like you're not vibing with the society, right? You're not doing things the way society needs you to be doing things. For instance, like neurodivergence is a big thing that comes up these days, but many times it's because like we need to be like very productive all the time in capitalistic society, and that's like many human brains just aren't built that way.
Can you explain neurodivergence for our audience?
Sure. Things like ADHD and autism, things where you have struggles with attention,
For sure.
you struggle with executive functioning, with your emotional regulation. In our society, we require people to have a big attention span and to be very emotionally regulated
Yeah,
in order to get along with other
for sure.
people. And when these things clash with society, that's when we start to have what we consider like a mental health issue, right?
Yeah,
Because it's clashing with society.
absolutely.
Whereas if you were in another society, it may not clash as much.
That has to be by far one of the best descriptions of that, like that I've ever heard.
Oh,
That
thank
is
you.
so like I love how you explain that and kind of held space for both
Hmm.
sides as opposed to just, demonizing one side versus the other.
Absolutely. I had a family member who went through an episode like you're talking about, and in our culture there was belief that there were like demonic things happening,
Hmm.
and people asked me as a psychologist, like, what do you think,
Hmm.
right? What do you think? Do you think that that person had schizophrenia, psychosis? And I said, I don't think my opinion matters,
Mm.
right? Because it's not about my belief system or what I think is real. It's about like, what is this person experiencing and how are we going to help them,
Yeah,
right? If someone believes that modern medicine can help with their demonic spirits, and if that's what gets them the help, then that's the route we're going to take,
for sure.
right? If they don't believe in that and we're going to take another route, if they refuse that, we
Hmm.
still have to take the other route and try to help in whatever way we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's so good. I was having a conversation with my cousin this past weekend. She came from Africa. She was spending time in Malawi and all throughout Africa, and she was doing a missionary work. And one thing I know about African spirituality, it's a lot more robust, especially like Christianity. You
Hmm.
you, you see a lot more just miracles happening, and it's interesting because years ago, when there weren't as many hospitals, it's
Hmm.
like, who did you go to for healing?
Hmm.
You went to the local, maybe witch doctor or
Hmm.
the local healer, right?
Hmm.
In that tribe. And it's like that was the very modality or the very tool that they would use for healing. And there wasn't access to all of these, medical treatments and things like that.
Hmm.
And I do feel like there is space for both sides
Hmm.
because what do you do when you don't have access to therapy, to modern day medication? And I love the most recent studies of epigenetics where now we're seeing how the environment ultimately affects your genome.
Hmm.
And this kind of explains even miracles,
Hmm.
right? If the belief is there, it's like the placebo effect.
Right.
If you have the belief in the miracle, it's a lot more likely to work. And it's not even, like you said, it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in it. It's an incontrovertible fact that it works for a lot of people.
Hmm.
So whether you believe in it or not,
Right.
whether it's a supernatural healing from someone who places their hands on you or modern day medication, it works for, yeah, I mean, millions of people all around the world. So
I
I
believe
love
that.
the way that you describe that.
As a psychologist, I believe in first do no harm, right? And harm can happen in any space.
Hmm.
I am a big believer in evidence-based therapies. For
Hmm.
instance, I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. I believe in providing people with cognitive behavioral tools. And I also believe that a lot of therapy can be propaganda. To be honest, to
For
be honest
sure.
with you, there can be factions within different fields, and everyone's like, our field is the best, and this is why you should believe it in our way. And if you do it that other way, it's not good.
Hmm.
There's in our field for trauma, there's like the EMDR camp, and then there's the prolonged exposure camp and the
Hmm.
cognitive processing camp. And the truth is, they all work.
Yeah.
They all work.
Hmm.
There's evidence to provide that they all work. I also believe that, you know, the scientific method is an amazing thing, but it's limited.
For sure.
And there's certain things that just can't be measured.
Like trauma.
Right. And
Hmm.
so if we can't measure it, does that mean that we shouldn't use interventions that we've found to be helpful? I don't think so.
Very true.
And so I believe that because we have evidence to prove that some do, we should incorporate them. But if they're not working for someone, then we should pivot. That's
Yeah.
a big thing that I believe in, and a big thing that I want to bring to TCW
Hmm.
is that we are going to engage in evidence-based treatments, but there has to be enough variety in what we can provide, so that if something's not working for someone, we can take a different route.
Absolutely.
Right? Based on their belief system, based on their needs. Because that's going to look different for everyone.
Yeah, very true. No, it's so good. I love that. Especially for me, like I always look at things from a holistic standpoint, right? And every person is different, and there's no one silver bullet or a one size fits all approach. Everybody just requires, different forms of healing. So now, as we get ready to bring the plane in for a landing, I can talk to you all day about like a lot of these topics. There's just so much that we can cover. What would you say has been the darkest season of your life, and what did you do to overcome that?
Oof, what was the darkest season of my life, and what did I do to overcome that? I've had quite a few dark periods. I would say that probably one of the darkest was when I was in graduate school and I was working myself into the ground. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. My trauma was 100% in the driver's seat. I was doing great. I was getting amazing grades. I was on line with my dissertation. I was doing amazing things, but I was in so much pain and I was experiencing so many personal mental health struggles that all I did was work. All I did, my entire life surrounded work. And I believed that if I didn't just completely abandon my self-care, completely abandon all of my needs, I wouldn't be successful. I believed that I wouldn't be successful. I wouldn't matter. Everything would be pulled from under me. It was a really hard period in my life. I had to ask my grandmother to come and stay with me because I didn't feel safe by myself. And it was really, really hard. And the thing that helped me through that period the most, I was also in a very conservative state, and I'm not a very conservative person. And so I had no identity. I had none of my I had no Jamaican food, no Jamaican life. The thing that pulled me through that was love. I went back to see my family as much as possible. I had to have people remind me of who I am, where I come from. And that's the thing that I want people to know more than anything else, is that who you are is home. And the love you have for yourself will take you through anything.
For sure.
And you don't have to abandon yourself. You don't have to suffer in order to be successful. In order to be good at what you do, in order to be loved, in order to be worthy, in order to succeed, you do not have to sacrifice your health. You do not have to sacrifice the love for yourself. You do not have to sacrifice your family, your identity. All of those things are going to make you more successful. When I was able to go back home, when I was able to get my own therapy, I was reminded of my power. I was reminded that who I grew up being is actually my superpower and makes me a unique person. I was able to love myself again. And I'll never forget that part of my life, because that part of my life drove me towards my gift of being a psychologist. And it also taught me that there's nothing that I can't go through. So anytime that I have a trying time in my life now, I remember that time and I said, I got through that. And I remember the things that got me through that. So I reconnect with my family, I reconnect with my culture, I reconnect with my identity, and it takes me where I need to be.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was
Thank you.
incredible. Now, in terms of the future, what would you say is your North Star today? You recently became the new owner of, Tampa Counseling and Wellness, and this is a phenomenal place. And you kind of are standing on the shoulders of a giant, which is Dr. Carlos, who's also been on the podcast, and I absolutely love Dr. Carlos. And what would you say now is like the vision moving forward? And now you're kind of like in this entrepreneurial season,
Yeah.
right? Like what's that like for you? Like, are you nervous at all? Is it scary? And just what's the vision overall?
I have loved being an entrepreneur so far. I am, like you said, I have that competitive part of my spirit, and I love taking care of people, and stepping into this role, becoming a part of TCW has been a very natural progression. I love the people here, and I feel very deeply connected to taking care of them. For me, the next step is really nurturing Tampa Counseling and Wellness and helping take it to the next level. My goal is for this to be a space where people can come, know that they're going to get evidence-based treatment, know that they're going to be getting quality care. We are not about fast food care here. We're about deep healing. And so when you come in, you're going to get something, your symptoms are going to be reduced, but you also know that you're going to be able to search parts of your soul that you've never searched before. And so, as the owner of this place, my goal is to nurture the psychologists, the therapists here to not only learn and become grounded in evidence based care, but also to empower them to be their authentic selves so that they can have no nonsense conversations with people in a way where they don't feel judged.
For sure, for sure. No, it's beautiful. And in terms of like the people who come here, like who would be a person that, or what would you be going through to the point where you're like, okay, I need to go to TCW. I need it. I need to get some work. Like, who's your ideal customer? If there was an ideal customer, or is it pretty much just anyone who is navigating through a difficult season of their life, or maybe they're going through mental challenges, maybe there's marital issues, things like that. Who would you say is the ideal person to come here?
I would say that we probably have a therapist for any type of person. Something that I've been wrestling with is where I'm going to navigate. Do I want to become a completely specialized clinic, or do we want to be more generalized? And as I've thought through that, I have thought that I really want Tampa Counseling and Wellness to be a place where anyone in Tampa can come to heal. And so for me, I tend to see folks who have struggled with trauma, with sexual trauma. I see a lot of veterans. I tend to see a lot of executives, a lot of high achieving people, because that's my story and that's my life, and those are the people that I resonate with. But we have amazing therapists here that do marriage and family therapy, that do couples therapy. We have a great therapist that works with men and boys with their struggles with emotional intelligence. We have people who work with single moms, women going through postpartum, and we really pride ourselves on being able to touch the lives of pretty much anyone that can come through our doors. I believe that mental health should be something like a family doctor, right? Where everyone in the family can come and learn to communicate and learn to heal, because again, if one person in the family isn't well, nobody's well.
I agree.
And so we invite everyone and anyone to come here. We specialize, but we do have an emphasis and specialization in trauma for sure, because many people have gone through traumas. And so I definitely like trauma-informed care to be the underbelly of everything we do, because that's usually the nexus of many of the struggles that people are going through.
I love that. That's amazing. And where can our audience find you guys and also find you?
So they can find me on Instagram at Dr. Saarah the Psych. And
that's Saarah with 2 A's, by the way.
Yes, Saarah with 2 A's, Saarah. And our website is tampacounselingandwellness.com. And those are probably the two best places to find us right now.
Amazing. And if there was any last words of wisdom that you would share with the audience, God forbid this was the very last interview that you ever do, what would be your message to the world?
I would say that my main message is that you do not have to abandon yourself to matter.
So good. Dr. Saarah, thank you so much. This has been such a joy. Appreciate you as always. Hopefully we can get you for a second episode at some point in time.
Absolutely, I love that.
Make sure you guys come and visit Tampa Counseling and Wellness, and you guys definitely will get a lot of value. Even if you're not in the Tampa area, I would still recommend coming here and checking it out. But this has been such a beautiful experience, and thank you for just giving us your time. And it's been such a joy just, conversing with you here over the last, hour or so. So thank you.
Thank you
And
for having me.
till next time, guys, make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, share it with someone who can get value from this, and make sure you follow Dr. Saarah wherever she is online. So till next time, take care.